right. Welcome back, everybody. Episode 6, I believe, of our book that we've been reading, Principles of the Changing World Order. Today, we're talking about Chapter 7, which is going to be investing in light of the big cycle, chatting about market determinants, central bank actions, big cycle markets, and just kind of historical examples of these cycles. So, without further ado, we're here in my living room. I got a little glass of bourbon here. Johnny's got a little beverage.
Cheers.
Cheers indeed. Just to say beforehand, just a disclaimer, we're not financial experts. I did get a degree in finance, but God, as my witness, I cannot manage my own money. So don't listen to me if I give advice.
And I will also be talking about, investing and stuff. I am also not an investor, or I am an investor, but I'm not a professional at giving advice. So, I've made my own investments. I'd like to think I could manage my money well. Probably not as well as Ray Dalio, but still, don't take my advice to heart. It's just what we have done, and it's just what we have read. We are only reporting personal anecdotes and opinions and facts from the book.
Yes, it is purely informational. Sorry, I'm walking away here. Yeah, purely informational. Just to give you all again the raw footage. Just turn the light on in my living room, so because we don't shy away from giving you all the real deal. The
We don't
raw.
edit here.
No. Well, we don't have anybody to edit, unfortunately.
And we're a little too lazy to edit. I don't even think we listen to our videos before we post them.
I don't. I kind of
I know.
skimmed through. I skimmed through, but that's about it.
I read the book. That's my responsibility.
There you go. Well, let's get started. So I guess first off, do you want to chat about the market determinants? I know it's kind of the first big piece here. I don't know if you wanted to tackle that or if you wanted me to chat about that.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and start on page 218. Again, I think we posted the outline in our last video, but so we'll try and post the outline again. We didn't use a random outline we found online. We created this one with hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. So this is some good content. So we're going to try and post this link. But the first information Ray gives us about investing in light of the big cycle, this is the big capital cycle, of course, is giving us a brief overview of what he calls the 4 market determinants. If you're a fan of AI, artificial intelligence, or statistical algorithms, the determinants are kind of the factors in your equation. And so the equation we're trying to sort of get down to the bottom of is, basically just a present value to future value of money. And of course, when you're investing, you put a lump sum in at the beginning, and then you get, payouts over time. And if you're, investing in dividends or stocks with dividends, these payouts are over time. But if you're not, then sometimes that payout is in the end. But the 4 market determinants, they are growth, inflation, risk premiums, and discount or interest rates. And I'll just, I'm familiar with growth and inflation. I think growth is pretty self-explanatory. Growth is, if you're thinking about a stock, if you buy it at $10 and it's $100, it had $90 of growth. Simple as that. Inflation, I think that's a topic we like to talk about quite a bit because our government is quite good at it. Inflation is when you, if you're thinking about the US dollar, you have a certain amount of dollars that represent the real asset value of your economy, the goods you produce, and that sort. And there's a set number of dollars at a certain period of time that represent that real value. And if you create more dollars to represent that same amount of value, each dollar represents less real value. And that's kind of the, best explanation I can give for inflation. You want to take on risk premiums and discount rates, Mr. Finance?
Sure enough, a risk premium, it's doing exactly what it says, right? It's whatever the gain is. So I'm saying off the top of my head, it's like the return of whatever asset in excess of the risk-free rate of return. So that's all it is. So I mean, when you think about it, it's risk premium. It's whatever in excess of risk-free rate that you're getting on whatever asset. So that premium is generally measured into, I'm trying to remember, it's been a while since I've taken investments, but there's like a formula where you add in I'll have to circle back to that. I forgot what formula it is. But anyway.
But risk premium, just like, so I have a question. If you're investing in like a startup versus like a big established company in the Dow Jones, like the startup's going to have a bigger risk premium typically, right?
I mean, I guess that's a good analogy. I would say a better one would be like a form of technology, right? Like I guess when microchips, or what are those called? Semiconductors. When those first came out, the risk premium was way higher on those because I guess the knowledge of what that return would be was not yet known, and knowing like what this technology is. So therefore the potential for that to be worth nothing was high, but also when it did get a return, it got way higher than what a standard return would be if you invested in them, right? So that might be a good one as like a comparison.
Is risk premium assessed up front, or is it more of like a back end thing?
I'm not sure. I would assume that. Let me see.
Because I don't know, if I'm investing, like I've heard of risk. I guess I've never heard of the word premium associated with it. But let me just real quick read what Ray Dalio says about risk premium on page 218, right below the red italicized sentence where he gives the four determinants. Ray Dalio says, that is because all investments are exchanges of lump sum payments today for future payments. What these future cash payments will be is determined by growth and inflation. What risk investors are willing to take in investing in them as compared to having cash in hand is the risk premium.
Right. So, and that kind of partners up what I'm saying here. It represents payment to investors for tolerating the extra risk in a given investment over that of a risk-free asset. So basically it's an incentive to say, okay, we're going to give you this additional amount we're going to give you this premium because you're not just investing your money in something that is absolutely risk-free like a T-bond, So it's not. It's that incentive, that added incentive. But,
okay. So in terms of like equity, I have a easy time thinking in equity. If you were to invest in like a semiconductor company back right after maybe the dot-com bubble, where semiconductors are used for technology and stuff like that, there would probably be a pretty big discount on semiconductor manufacturing companies' stocks versus, I don't know, a company that like cuts down trees and turns it into paper, right? Like that, you're not going to receive the same risk premium discount on the stock, which translates into larger returns over time if that company is successful. Is that kind of aligned?
yes, I just don't want to say. It's been a while since I've researched it, so I just don't want to say anything that's incorrect. Okay. So let's say
Maybe risk premium could translate to higher dividends
okay,
in
think
a
about it
risky
this way.
stock.
This is a good way to think about it. Think about it this way. So think of a y and x axis, a graph with a y and x, or the x and y axis. X axis is risk. Y axis is expected return, right? So if the graph is here, somewhere on the bottom is going to be a line that's horizontal. It's going to be the risk-free return, and there's going to be a line kind of a little bit higher up that's your risky return, E of R. So your risk as a graph of whatever instrument that is, whatever asset that you're looking at, is going to be it's going to start at some point on the y-axis, but it's going to be pretty straightforward, right? It's going to be a straight line, but it's whatever is going to be the point where it crosses that top horizontal versus the point where it crosses the bottom horizontal. That difference is going to be your risk premium. So if your return on, if again you're looking at some sort of like volatile technology, and your return is looking at like you could potentially get like a 12% return on it, but your risk-free rate is 1%, then your premium is going to be 11. So I would look at it honestly, and now it's kind of ringing a bell. I wouldn't look at it more as like a practical thing more than a mathematical tool.
Okay, so this is like the risk-free rate. I don't want to dive too deep, so we can move on to discount rate after this. But like, if we want to look at it, the risk-free rate is kind of if the company completely fails and it just the only value you get out of it is if it liquidates its assets. If you sell all the computers and the monitors and whatever, versus if it's successful as it says it is, that
Well, it's
risk.
an asset. It's by asset. So again, the risk-free rate would be, for example, you investing in a T-bill, in a treasury bill. That's a risk-free asset, because no matter what, you're generating 1% on it, whatever, but there's zero risk. There's not a risk variable associated with that.
Okay.
So zero risk. So it's more of like you're taking an individual asset versus buying again, a really volatile piece of technology that, maybe the return is like 12, 13%, but ultimately it's just by it being that high, there's risk involved. So that risk premium is going to be that 12 or that 11 difference,
All right, that makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to everyone who's listening.
Sorry, guys, but well, at least discount rate's a little bit easier. It's just the rate of interest that a central government, central bank, will allot for a commercial bank for a loan.
And so our interest rate in the United States is what, 5.25%? 22-year high, baby.
For the
The effective federal funds rate, EFFR. That's I believe the rate that the Fed loans out money to other banks. If the Fed makes or if a bank loans money from the Fed, they have to pay 5.25% interest on that. And I think that's a pretty good, like if you get a mortgage from a bank that's lending money from the Fed, then, you're going to be paying that 9 or 10% interest rate. So the bank makes money on top of that 5.25.
right. I will say that EFFR is not. There's no collateral represented in that calculation.
What do you mean by that?
So EFFR is lending rates without any sort of treasury-backed collateral. So there's another one, SOFR. The SOFR is a similar, it's a similar rate that's calculated overnight lending rates, but the SOFR takes into account treasuries as collateral. So banks will put up whatever they have on hand as collateral. So that calculation would be different. And the same thing would be representative in the actual like central bank as well. Whatever they have is also listed as, that would be collateral depending on who's lending to who.
Okay. In the SOFR, I believe I remember reading about this recently. That is the new kind of federal interest rate that like the US is beginning to use, but I think the whole world is trying to get on the SOFR train. Is that interest rate typically lower because the collateral is in place? Like if, and I suppose that collateral is like if the bank doesn't pay back their debts, then the Fed gets their collateral, right?
Well, I guess it depends because at the SOFR, I feel like it's not necessarily always lower because it depends on what you have as in your treasury. Like if your treasury is super low slash non-existent, then I would assume in that formula it would represent as some sort of hint. It would be more of like a negative, so to speak. So if you're counting that as a variable there, but it's zero to not much at all, I would imagine there would be a negative implication on the actual end result.
It would increase the interest rate if you didn't have any collateral.
I would assume so. Because, I mean, think about it. Like, if you don't have anything to show for it and you're borrowing money and you have nothing in your reserve, I don't know. I would imagine that, like, SOFR, I mean, yeah, it's probably a newer way of doing it, but I don't think that either one's necessarily going to be consistently higher or lower. I think it just varies on who is asking, I guess. Who's asking for that loan.
That makes sense to me. Okay. So that was growth, inflation, risk premiums, and discount or interest rates. Those are our market determinants. And I don't know. Maybe this is a conversation for a different time, but does the word market ever just kind of grind your gears? Like people who claim to be able to read the market, whatever that means.
It's it's so bogus. If you say you could read the market, you're a liar. Like you're just a liar because this is not the truth. Like I've read books. A really good one is called A Random Walk Down Wall Street. Totally would recommend to the listeners. But it's the whole point of it is that no one can accurately predict the market. It's the whole point of the book. No one can. There's no tried and true. Not even mathematics and forecasting can get you half of the way there. But there's no predicting the market. There really isn't. So I don't know. Like I think it's when people say that they can read the market, I'm just kind of like it doesn't grind my gears more than just like you're kind of like retarded. Like unfortunately, and sorry if anyone takes offense to that word here, but yeah, no, I'm so not sorry. You're retarded if you think you can read the market. You're retarded. And
I wish I could even define the word market.
well, a market is what? I mean, look at it at its most rudimentary. A market is where buyers and sellers come together to exchange items for currency. That's what it is. A market, and a market can be anything from you are in a fishing town in Indonesia where literally people are coming on their boats and you're trading freaking produce for fish. That's a market. Or a market can be where you're not even necessarily directly trading commodities anymore. Now you're trading currency for commodity. And then at that point, you're trading currency for a basket of different commodities. Like you're getting, oh, I'm going to get this, a little bit of this, and I'm going to trade you currency for it. And then it becomes trading currency for other currencies and trading currency for the potential for commodities to be better. So it's really just expanding upon the basic human principle of trading goods and services. That's all a market is. So I think people make that word be a little bit bigger and more scary than it is. It's really just market's just a market. It's just a trading place. That's all it is.
Yeah, I guess the problem I have with it is we kind of speculate the value that goods and services have to a certain extent. Like maybe it's easier to say, okay, I need 10 barrels of oil between, the fertilizer that needs to be produced and the gas that needs to power my tractor to harvest this amount of wheat. Like in that sense, the market isn't speculative when you're comparing goods to goods. But when you're comparing, like, and this is, I think, the part that grinds my gears, when you're comparing a printed fiat currency to oil and wheat and gold, and then you get into stocks where it's like, yeah, this company has this amount of returns, and they allocate their returns, their profits to this percentage to their employees, this percentage reinvested in the business, and then this business may generate these returns in the future. That's kind of where it gets squirrely for me, especially when you think about how the central bank and the central government plays a role in those exchanges. Like, I guess the problem for me is it's not a simple formula. And even if it was just a complex formula, I wouldn't really have a problem with it. But I don't even think it's like a formula at all. I think a lot of it is like human psychology.
100%. And that's like, I think I had that conversation recently with somebody. Was that like finance or finance, as however you want to say it, it's a made up thing. Like, it's made up because, I mean, ultimately the mathematics behind it is real. Math in general is, I think, a universal truth. I think we can all agree that mathematics is something that is not made up. Like, math, if anything, like a science, you can embellish. These are things you can kind of make like theories, but math is pretty like easy to prove generally whether something is right or wrong.
It's like 2 + 2 = 4.
No refuting that. No refuting that fact at all. But so that being said, like, I think that the mathematics behind finances and like, it's very, very, very true. But as a concept, I think, again, like, to take what you said and expand upon, I think that like we have taken this concept of trading hard item for hard item or hard item for currency to now trading currency for currency spread out at certain intervals in the future, contingent upon the fact that your prediction on how much of this item or basket of items is going to be sold. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. And in reality, it's just, it's made up. It's a made up. And that's why when people say, oh, trading and finance is a science, it's not a freaking science. It's a pseudoscience. It's something that literally has its roots in math and in human, sociology, but at its, modern finance, like talking about Wall Street, that stuff is all bogus. And I'll tell you right now, if the freaking end of the world is tomorrow, these guys would have no idea. They would be like, where do we translate our real skills? Like, how do we use these skills in a situation where we don't have capital markets? You can't. So, yeah. I agree.
I wonder, and kind of to your point, there's a good graph on one of these pages. Let's see. Hold on. I almost found it. There's a good graph on page 234, which kind of describes, like, the x-axis is the real asset value of the economy. I don't know how that's determined outside of, like, without using financial assets, but
the real value of the economy.
Yeah, it's like Ray Dalio calls it real asset value, or like wealth value compared to financial asset value, the tools and levers of control that are, employed to represent the value of the real economy, whether that's in the present moment or into the future. And you can kind of see, like, the financial asset value is supposed to represent the real asset value, I suppose, factoring in the future risk and the future growth of the real assets and the companies producing these real assets. But a lot of times they're like, it's just this red line, this financial asset line just goes up and down and up and down, constantly, like, crossing over this real asset value line. I think that's like, I don't know. That's like the best representation of the market that I can think of. It's like the market sometimes is really positive on the real asset value, and then sometimes it's like it's just not. And I can't really explain that outside of like human psychology and natural disasters. It's really odd how this speculation works, but I think we're getting too far into the conceptual at this point.
Yeah.
But that's that's the thing that makes me just want to invest in real assets. It's like real assets, you're always going to be able to trade 10 pounds of wheat for 1 barrel of oil. Unless technology improves, there's more efficient tractors or more efficient processes or fertilizers that don't require as much oil to produce. You're always going to be able to trade a certain amount of hard asset for hard asset, and
Sure.
it just gets back down to the basics. Versus now we've gone from hard asset to hard asset to currency based on a hard asset that's traded for another hard asset to currency that's based on nothing, like literally the faith and trust in the US government or whatever government that's just printing out money that everyone for some reason agrees that it has value, to trading other assets.
And then we have freaking currency that's not even currency at all. It's not even made up that's being sold. And then we have also freaking artwork that is generated online that is purchased using fake currencies that are made up nothing that somehow people think has value, and they sell said artwork for tons of money, and that shit just turns to nothing, and people are like, I can't believe I spent all this money. Well, you're stupid, you're dumb. So ultimately, I think that it's like, for you to be an uneducated investor right now, oh man, good luck. Good luck. Because I don't know if you saw, but there's this guy who was holding on. He bought Dogecoin like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and he like put all of his life savings into it. And he has not liquidated that yet. And at one point, he could have been set for life because I think it was like worth like 7 million or something like that. So if he sold right there and he got his money's worth, he could have totally put it in some sort of investment account, withdrew 3% a year, and that's his salary. He's chilling. Buy a home, get a little bit of spending money, you're good. And the rest is invested, getting interest on it. Like but he didn't. And it's like that just kind of leads me to believe that like I think you're right in the sense of like trading hard assets, but I think it's kind of just good to get back to basics a little bit. And I think hard assets to hard assets, currencies with hard assets, because I mean sometimes it's not also smart to only have hard assets. That's also not smart. You want to have, at least in my opinion, to each their own, but I think that to have a balanced basket of different ways of trading is the most important thing. So having cash, having money invested in financial institutions, because ultimately we all rely on these financial institutions. And if we want for them to work, then we need to kind of be involved in these financial institutions as well. It's kind of like the whole thing that people don't realize, that banks, if banks fail, okay, yeah, we're kind of in a tough spot. But ultimately, in order for them to not fail, we have to put our money into them. So it's like, it doesn't make sense for us to be pulling things out when it's like, oh, but we need this system to work. So then put your money in there. Not all of it, obviously. Ideally, you put in a little bit, but it's all about being diversified, folks. That's the point. It's all about being diversified.
I can agree with that. But I think this conversation just emphasizes the fact that if you think you can predict the market, you're probably one of those people who lacks intelligence. The R word.
RETARDED. Retarded. That's the one time I'm going to say that on this show, folks. That's it. No more.
I believe it. Okay, so let's get into some of the things that I don't know, central governments and central banks do to make the market unpredictable. So there's a couple quotes here. This is from page 219. Central bank actions which drive market returns and economic conditions. So this is from central bank. When growth and inflation are too low, central banks print money. This leads to economic growth and later inflation. And then the other like lever of control here that central banks have is when central banks constrain money and credit growth. Typically, I believe this is through like raising interest rates, raising the rate that banks have to pay to lend money from the central bank. So when central banks constrain money and credit growth, growth and inflation decrease because there's not a lot of buying power to go around. Not only are they typically not printing money in these times, increasing the amount of financial assets going around that could be put in people's hands for purchasing power, but there's also not a lot of fake money, as I like to think of it, credit, that is able to go around. People can't acquire debt at a low cost to increase their purchasing power.
Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to point out here is what I find interesting is that I think right now the economy doesn't really know what to do because it's kind of doing both, right? Like it's like inflation is high, relatively speaking, when you're referring to like the past, I'll say 20 years. It's definitely pretty high. But at the same time, interest rates are really high. So it's like when you try to go get a used car, or when you try to go, to buy a house or whatever, interest rates are super high. During COVID, that was the time to buy a home because COVID actually, like, those were low ass interest rates, and that was kind of the best time to get one. But now everyone's getting screwed on it, and debt reconciliation is very hard to do right now. Like you can't generally in times where interest rates are a little bit lower, it's easier for people to kind of reconsolidate and pay off debts. But now it's not the case. So it's just kind of confusing in my mind because I'm like, what are we doing right now? Because we're kind of going both ways. When, like it says here, it's directly conflicting because it says on one hand, growth and inflation are too low, like you said, central banks print money, right? Leads to growth and later inflation. And then when they constrain money and credit growth, inflation decreases and growth decreases. But right now we have inflation, but also at that same period of time, I feel like when the inflation, it's continuing. It's not like it's stopped, right? And they're still printing more money, but they're also making it incredibly hard for the consumer to buy things or to even like own a home or all these different things. So I guess my point is I'm curious to see where, like, what the strategy is and where that takes us 6 months from now, because I feel like at the rate it's going right now, I mean, it's going to have to hit like some sort of hard recession period, where the currency is not worth shit for a little bit, and then it's going to kind of have to be financial institutions need to kind of like start from ground zero a little bit and kind of work back up. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, we're already definitely seeing some financial institutions hit rock bottom and be acquired by others like Credit Suisse and First Republic and various other banks that have failed. I know there was one regional bank that failed, hit rock bottom in Kansas, I want to say. Don't exactly remember the name. I just remember seeing the headline. But I think the reason it looks a little weird right now is because inflation is like a lagging metric. When the money was printed, like that is going to affect like future asset production, right? If there's more money going around, if money is easier to come by, then it's like it just doesn't have as much value. And so the goods produced with the money with lower value are going to be, it's going to require more money to produce them. If we're thinking about, a gallon of wheat needs 10 barrels of oil. And then I think the same probably goes for decreasing inflation as well. I don't exactly know the mechanism behind it, but I imagine when uh, the central bank uh, increases the interest rate, which makes money harder to come by, inflation is a lagging metric because that harder to come by money is producing goods that people are going to be purchasing in the future. So I like, and that's honestly probably why we're seeing food inflation increase now rather than a year ago or whatever. Like we see like gas and stuff increase in price like pretty quickly because you pull it out of the ground and a week later it's people are buying it. But food, you're growing it one summer and then the next entire year people are paying for that food. And so for me, it seems like the harder to come by money now, which it may not be harder to come by yet. I've heard a lot of things that were saying there was so much money printed during COVID that people's savings accounts are pretty buffed up right now, and people still have the loans that they got with like zero interest, and they're still able to pay for them because layoffs and stuff I guess haven't hit too hard yet, although that seems to be picking up. So I imagine that like for food prices specifically, we're still going to have like another good year of inflated food costs, but like so that interest rate increase that makes money harder to come by. I suppose my point is it just hits different assets differently at different times, but it is, I think, generally a lagging metric.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I was just curious because I'm curious to see where the housing market goes because that always kind of works independently of other, commodities and like you can't really basket it in. I mean, real estate's always been kind of separate when it comes to like a category of asset, right? Um, but I mean, you really kind of see at least industrials. I was reading a report recently. I want to see if I can find it. But industrials has been doing pretty well as a sector in the United States as of recently, which would be interesting.
Yeah, I know the housing market is going to be doing pretty good, I imagine, for those people who don't get laid off and for those people who don't have variable interest rate mortgages, which, yeah, if you have one of those right now, you're you're in a tough
What, a
spot.
mortgage?
Yeah, the variable interest rate though. So
Oh,
as the federal interest rate increases, yours is
but I'm
going to
pretty sure that's what
increase too.
I think I know someone who has that right now.
Yeah, I wonder if banks were handing that out a little bit more in COVID, just since I don't know if anyone was really predicting this, that the Fed would increase interest rates. Now, I imagine some people were, considering how much money was printed and how much inflation comes with that amount of printing of money. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I know banks who bought a bunch of bonds. I don't know why they bought a bunch of bonds at 0% interest or whatever it was. But I imagine if they were being compelled to do that by the Fed, then they were probably issuing a lot of variable interest rate mortgages, which is tough.
Well, I wanted to say real quick. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your mortgages point. Complete side note: industrials is 14% for the year, which is pretty stable. 12% over 3 months, and then 3.51% over the past month. It's a very stable sector to invest in. So I'm not an expert, but invest in that and transportation, and you should be. I mean, not high growth, but again, like there's always going to be development in those areas. So, but interesting about the real estate market. I don't know. I'm just trying to like. It's really hard for us to speculate here now, like where things are going to be, even like 6 months from now. You know, like I'm just curious to see what the new narrative is going to be. Especially, I will say, markets always change after an election, or even in preparation for an election result. Markets adapt. So I'm curious to see, depending on what this new president situation, because when does that really start kicking off? I'm not sure exactly
I
when.
think
Like,
it's late 2024, right? Like
and
that's when.
nomination would be 2025.
Yeah, I think the new president would get in like January 2025.
Man, we're screwed. We're toast.
Bidenomics.
Never mind, we're toast, dude. I thought we had a little bit less time till then. Golly. Yeah, good luck, guys.
Don't buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I wonder what. I mean, I have confidence that like within the next little bit they'll be able to get things in control. But it seems as of recently that things are very much out of control, and especially with Yellen. What's her name? It's Yellen, right?
Janet.
Janet Yellen. Yeah, with her leading that, I think, or her leading like the Fed, I think that she's made a lot of poor decisions, and obviously I would need to kind of check the details about what exactly she's done, but I've read a lot of reports that she is kind of actively contributing to debt ceiling talks, and kind of like she's just kind of very much
Yeah, I mean, what can you
my
expect? She's a woman. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding.
ouch. I'm just kidding.
I think if we're thinking about okay, so from what I've heard in the real estate market, commercial real estate is the big weak point, and that is primarily because the people who have commercial real estate investments and mortgages, their commercial real estate buildings are not occupied right now. And if you're investing in commercial real estate, that's probably your primary source of income, and that is how you pay your mortgage. So if your building is not being used, you're not earning rent, and you're not able to pay off your mortgage. I think another weak point in the real estate market right now probably isn't residential, because we're not seeing layoffs, but it's probably coming from construction companies. If I see a lot of construction around here, these are mortgages that were taken out years ago. And if you're building a neighborhood and no one is going to be buying a house because interest rates are super high, then you can't pay off your mortgage as a construction company, or your loan as a construction company, because no one's buying your houses. That's kind of where I see the weak points of the real estate market right now. As far as like residential real estate folks paying off their mortgages, I mean, I would see that maybe increasing slightly, if the people get laid off. But again, layoffs haven't really been happening. But, one thing I do know is during COVID, a lot of people went online and a lot of businesses saw that, oh, we can just pay for a Zoom subscription rather than building rent. And that's a lot cheaper. And we don't have a great culture, but we still get our work done. I think that's kind of the argument behind that one.
Well, I think what's also interesting about that is I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, I would expect that layoffs as a whole, when we look at big companies, might be a little bit larger moving forward, just because my thought is if all these big consulting firms and they're all allowing for people to work, not so much anymore, but they have a lot of folks who are working remotely, like 100% remote. And it's almost like, I was thinking about this in my own context, but I was like, if I were running a company, now we're like one of the most like high senior people in the office in whatever, for us, in Atlanta, I'm the most senior person there. And there's one person who I see every single day who's always there, and two people are equal at their jobs, but one's there in the office every day, contributing to the culture, knows people, goes to the events, whatever is part of the company, versus somebody who works purely remotely. I would view the purely remote person as more of a contingent worker than as an employee. You're kind of somebody who just logs in, gets things done for us, and then logs off, right? You're not directly contributing to anything for the company. Like there's no longevity for you. So honestly, like I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these virtual folks like end up getting kind of like fired as time goes on, because I mean, especially if you're like a college aged hire, right? Because you have no skills you're bringing to the table. I'm sorry. You have no skills. Like you don't. Like, I mean, you have an education, which is good, but unless you are working remotely, but you have a set defined skill set, like I've been doing, whatever system for 10 years, otherwise you don't have skills to provide, you're probably going to get laid off if they need to, unfortunately, and that's just the case. And I think that overall, especially when it comes to consulting firms and financial services, I think there's going to be a good amount of layoffs coming here soon. I think it's just a matter of when, but I think that a lot of people, especially in the big firms, I think they're going to lose their jobs because they're just way too saturated right now. Way too many people. They hire way too intensely, and what for? What? What do these people even do all day? There's no way of tracking their activity all offline. Like what are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, they're just hiring a bunch of Chegg tutors to do all their work. I mean, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was kind of central bank actions. We sort of went on a little tangent there, but essentially central banks create money and credit, but can't determine where they're used. Whereas the central government determines where the money comes from and where it is used. And so, I don't know. The interesting thing that I have sort of learned recently is, I don't know, the federal government of the United States, it really doesn't, they can't determine what the Fed is going to do. Like, the House of Representatives, I believe, can abolish the Fed or something like that if they don't like them. Like that has happened many times over US history, but it's pretty interesting like how kind of true that is. Like all the central governments can do is really like maybe talk to the Fed and be like, hey, you want to print us some money or make some bonds, uh and but even the Fed, I don't think they can lend directly to the federal government. So, whereas the federal government, they can tax all they want, and then I guess spend it directly on, certain projects. Like, for example, I wish our federal government would invest in our infrastructure a little bit. I've heard a lot of stuff that's like our bridges are all collapsing, or they're about to collapse at least, or hey, maybe I don't know, like not invest in Ukraine. Like it's really not our war. It's not our fight. Why are we giving 500 billion every 2 weeks to Ukraine when there's like more homeless people in California than there are people in homes, Like maybe maybe I don't know. Spend money a little bit better.
Spend money for things that will directly and positively help people at home.
Yeah, do you think investing in Ukraine will like have second or third order effects that help us at home?
Not at all. Not at all. I think, you know, because if we put so much money there, we're not even gonna have Ukrainians coming here helping us out with our own infrastructure. Like they're moving from Ukraine, like coming to the United States, getting a job. Like we're not even gonna get that anymore.
But hey, our president can go over to Ukraine and continue to launder money through them.
Well,
That's a
because
pro.
right, because I mean, people talk about like, oh, laundering or like going to putting money in Switzerland for tax benefits. Imagine what you can do in Eastern Europe, dude. Imagine what you can do in Eastern Europe. It's literally virtually there's no oversight. There's
Ukraine
no
is
oversight.
known for
Yeah.
being massively corrupt and housing like all of our dirty laundry
Yeah, and
over
also for like sex trafficking too.
Sound of Freedom.
Just saying. Just saying. So it's interesting that when the sex trafficking capital of the world becomes threatened by an outside country, that all of a sudden we freak out.
Yeah, that's like the one humanitarian issue that we actually care about.
Yeah,
Huh.
quite interesting. But when it comes to like women and children dying in other parts of the world, doesn't matter. Or like euthanization, sterilization attempts across the world. It doesn't matter. But oh, God forbid they touch our Ukrainians. And obviously, if you're Ukrainian, I love you. But like ultimately, it's like there is a big double standard here, and it's like there are interests at play, undoubtedly, that are deeper than the surface. It's not just Zelensky. There's a lot of, I think, and I agree, there's dirty laundry here that will be aired out if we do not actively try to cover it up. There's something here for sure. For sure.
Yeah, it's just messed up. I, we, and this is kind of why I want RFK to be president. It's like he's like, yeah, let's stop spending so much money on the military
Yeah.
and invest it back home. Simple as that.
He's right about that. But one thing that does kind of concern me a little bit is he is kind of a lawyer. You can kind of tell in the way he talks, he's a lawyer for sure.
But he works out.
Yeah, but lawyers, man, lawyers are sneaky. They're always sneaky, dude. They find a convenient. I'm not saying it's the case with him, but they always find a way to sneak lie into truth or make someone else's truth seem like a lie or make a lie seem like the truth.
I hear you. I just think RFK better than Biden,
Oh, no doubt. Come on.
won't lead to a civil war like Trump. Seems like a stand-up guy. Like he's been on podcasts. He is against vaccines. I'm down.
I mean, I'm down too. I mean, it would be interesting though hearing him speak live to the American people all the time because, golly, he's got to clear his throat. I know he's got problems with his throat. I know he's got problems with his voice. It's from the vaccine
Can you
thing. I get.
do a Robert F. Kennedy impersonation?
Here's why when I was a kid. When I was a kid, my uncle, my uncle would give us cough drops, and when I was a kid, my uncle, that's all he is. When I was young, I heard frogs. Frogs get sick. When I was a kid,
That's good.
that's what I could do.
That's good. That's good. Okay. Okay. That was another little tangent there, but that's what you're here for, right? Right. Okay. So back to investing. I think a good point. Robert Ray, whatever his name is, Dalio brought up is that portfolios often suffer from survivorship bias. And this is page 220. And that you can prevent this by looking at the winners and losers of vast swaths of history rather than just the winners and losers in your own lifetime. And this is a pretty powerful concept. I think, like, I don't know. We all think we can't go to World War III because we weren't alive during the First World Wars or the Second World Wars, and neither were our parents or our grandparents, you know? And we see a bunch of examples of how, like, there were really only like two winners, right, in World War I and World War II. One was the United States, and I don't know, was the other one Great Britain? I don't really know.
No, I would say probably Soviet Union. Because I mean, well, although Soviet Union didn't win the First World War, they weren't really like they kind of had to drop out because of internal affairs and like the collapse of.
The Soviet Union had their bond and equity markets closed
Oh, you're talking
for
about financially who were the victors?
70 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay, then yeah, the U.S. for sure. I mean, it would have to be. I mean, I wouldn't say England though, because after World War II, they lost virtually all of their colonies. Like everything.
Mm.
That was like the end of imperialism, right? So they lost India, which was by far their most lucrative colony. So I don't think that they necessarily won anything out of World War II. So I don't know. Like
They
I don't
didn't
know. U.S.
fail.
won. They didn't fail, but they didn't necessarily gain much. It kind of evened itself out. I feel like. Whereas I feel like the United States definitely gained. No doubt about it. They gained after World War II, for sure.
So if we were to look at like a World War III, like in light of, oh yeah, if you want to invest right before World War III, who are you going to invest in, or who or what maybe? What would you do? What would you invest in if you had $1 million?
I would go Australia, Japan, and United States.
What about like assets, like
Oh, items like things.
bullets, maybe?
Oh, I mean, yeah, bullets are good in wartime. But I would say, like, I mean, probably like some sort of Raytheon, Boeing, you know, Lockheed, big kind of big defense firms, and that goes into the industrials sector. Just saying, but yeah, Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, because they're gonna have to continue to produce ultimately, and even if they're producing cheaper things, they're still going to be making stuff, and they need the supplies to do it. I would say buying raw materials, like investing in if you can do like basket of like, especially metal, like metals would be huge. Like in terms of metallurgy, and like them actually making iron and copper and making these things, like you're gonna need metal to make any sort of casings for bullets, for you know armor for armored vehicles, for planes. You need metal for any of that shit. Like you're not going to be using styrofoam, right? So
And how do you produce metal? You need energy.
you need energy. Yeah, you need energy and heat. We got to go down there and freaking melt that stuff down, make some metals. Which they're going to go right back to doing that in the U.S. of A. too. That's what they're going to have to do. wake up those old West Virginia towns. We're gonna need that coal, and we're gonna need to go down there. We're gonna need to get some metals. That's what we're gonna have to do. In the Appalachia.
Yeah. What about our carbon footprint? Have you
I
ever
don't think
thought
we're gonna
about
care
that?
about that, dude. If we're in wartime, I don't think anyone cares about that. It's either carbon footprint or atomic footprint. What do you prefer?
Atoms are pretty small, bro. I don't know how
Oh
big those
man,
carbon footprints are
Putin would
gonna.
love you, dude. Putin would love you as a friend. No, but I think yeah, it would have to because I was just watching a documentary recently about them going to like old mining towns in Appalachia and like the West Virginia, kind of like deep Appalachia. Those things are like long abandoned now. Like long abandoned. Some of these towns like are completely empty.
Yeah, how many spider webs do you think they got in those mines? Like, if you had to put a number on it,
Too many. To more enough that would scare me out. But like, listen, like
got like 1,000 spider webs.
probably more than 1,000. But all I know is that people. That's the poorest region of the United States, and on top of that, people need jobs bad now. No one's getting paid enough. I would bet money that people would be down to relocate, go out there and mine. And the children yearn for it too. You've seen Minecraft. They want to mine. They want to be down there getting soot on their heads with a canary, possibly dying. But like, listen,
You think you got black lung? No. Quit complaining. Get back to work.
I'm not feeling so. Shut up. Get back in the mine, Jimmy. Stop complaining, or you're not gonna get your penny for today.
I do wonder if we would wake up the minds. I think that would be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
In this administration, I don't know if you noticed, like, gas prices have gone up like 30-40 cents in the past like 2 weeks or so.
Oh, trust me, I filled up my tank the other day. I saw it.
I believe that is because I haven't really gone out and done much research to verify this, but I believe that is because our strategic oil reserves are running a little low. And obviously, if they're running low, we're not getting oil out of the ground to fill them up. And I don't know, we're spending a lot more money on Saudi Arabian oil, which I don't know why we're doing that. I feel like we should just be buying oil from Russia if they're selling it at dirt cheap prices,
I would buy oil from Russia. I think we talked about it last time. Oh yeah, I mean if they're doing it but the thing is, we've already kind of set this precedent that we're not willing to trade with Russia, so we're not going to go back on that word. But what we could do is go through India, make India buy a ton of cheap Russian oil, and we're like, hey, India, come on, like buy like a little extra for us. Like, like I know we told them we're not gonna trade with them, but just buy a little extra. We buy it off you. Because one thing that I do really appreciate is obviously like the whole Keystone Pipeline thing was a little dicey, but like there's arguments on both sides, I feel like. But I feel like one thing about the United States which is so special is that we do conserve and work to conserve the natural beauty of this country, right? And I think that that is very important because other countries don't give a damn about that, So I think if we can avoid, obviously we have the means to drill for oil within our own country, and we have oil. It's not the issue, but I think the fact that we're relying on other people first in this case might be a good thing. Because then when you think about it, when your back's to the wall, you have the infrastructure to build this stuff, this equipment to drill for it. So it's like you're almost like saving your own personal supply till the very last minute, which makes sense. It makes sense, but that doesn't mean you should be paying exorbitant amounts of money to Saudi Arabia for their oil. It
I
doesn't.
think if we were truly doing that, like, I get your argument. I think if we were truly doing that, our strategic oil reserve would be full. That way, but oil prices would still be up because we're buying oil from other people. But that oil reserve would be full so that when we need to build the infrastructure in wartime because we can't buy it from anywhere, we at least have some oil to use, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that strategic oil reserve should be empty in general unless we're like in a war or crisis or something like that, or we got sanctions or tariffs or whatever.
Sure.
Because that it's what are we strategically avoiding right now? A recession right before an election? That is not appropriate, to be
No,
quite honest.
no. I mean, like, wasn't there? I mean, yeah, because what 2008 happened, then what happened? Obama became president, and again, kind of like you said with the like, people framed it as all Bush's fault. It wasn't all Bush's fault. I mean, obviously, some of these things were already the writing was on the wall. You know, it was going to happen, and similarly, it's not Biden's fault, quote unquote, like him individually. No, because ultimately he's not in the position of power to even dictate whether to even make choices to even guide to a recession. A recession, generally, these things are cooking, like you kind of said with inflation rates. Like it takes time for it to kick in, right? So it's like I wonder why they aren't just. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. But I would like another glass of bourbon, and for my father, my father used to play with frogs, and I took a vaccine, and I can't talk very well anymore. Joe, you bring up a really good point. I want him.
Okay, well, I have a rant prepared. Why don't you pour me a glass of bourbon, and after my rant, you can go on a rant because I need to take care of some business. I'll take a
Oh, okay, I got you.
little whiz here.
All right, ran away.
So, moving on, from survivorship bias, which I don't know if we really talked about all that much, but anyway, we're on page 221 through 223 right now, and we're looking at the big cycle of capitalism and markets. And so, first point I want to look at here is banks create credit. And in the past, when banks were initially created and credit was just entries in a journal, banks were allowed to lend 5 times more money than they actually had. And this is uh, today referred to as the reserve requirement. So if a bank has like, $25 and they have a, reserve requirement of this like 5 times amount or 20%, then they can lend out $125. And so this leads to one of Ray Dalio's universal principles. The more promises there are, i.e., like credit, the more credit there is out there, the more risk there is that the promises can't be kept. And so he goes on, when credit is created, buying power is created in exchange for a promise to pay back. So it is near term stimulating and longer term depressing because eventually all these promises have to be fulfilled. And if there's more promises kind of like built on top of one another, thank you, Izzy, by the way. Cheers once again. Then if one promise falls through, like if one debt obligation falls through, the debt obligation that's dependent on it is more likely to fall through, right? I think this is fairly obvious, but and it's kind of why the Fed needs to raise interest rates when there's too much credit or too much inflation, right? Because like raising interest rates decreases the amount of credit or the amount of promises that are dependent on other promises being fulfilled. And so this ultimately it just decreases the risk of I guess the markets, decreases the risk of promises not being fulfilled, debts not being paid, and decreases the risk of people not being able to pay their bills and such as a result, people not being able to put food on the table as a result. And so the downside of this though is lower growth because businesses, it's harder to get loans to start businesses and stuff like that. And so, Izzy, I'll leave you there.
To be fair, I was trying to manage, I was getting so many alerts on my freaking computer, and I was just hearing ping, 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 ping. But I had a quick little thing I wanted to chat about here, and this was more along the lines of how should we view what is going on today, from a financial perspective, but also just real world, right? Person to person, here's the situation. Finances are tricky. I would definitely advise not going into any debt right now. I think debt is one of the worst things you could put yourself in. Student debt obviously is one thing, but you want to try to avoid that. And honestly, do not. I think a lot of people are kind of hyping up, and there's a lot of echo chambering going on about what's going on in the world, specifically in the United States with the president and all these different factions and this sort of thing. I would just honestly, continue. I would say continue your own work, and just as a general philosophy that I have, um, control only what you can control, right? Control yourself, your family, your finances, your living situation. That's about it. And beyond that, I kind of want to put it in a broader context. I was speaking to my grandmother, very great, very intelligent woman, very, very, very valuable person in my life. And she was, I was kind of explaining some reservations and concerns I had about what's going on in the world right now. And she, kind of put those at rest by saying, this ain't nothing that other people haven't seen before, right? Like it's nothing that, um, when it comes to inflation, right? It's nothing that the 80s couldn't top when it comes to levels of inflation. Or, gas prices, nothing like this other period of time couldn't top when it comes to gas prices. I'm not sure if gas prices could be topped, but, I'm just giving another example. Um, Point being, it's important to put things into context and understand that we are not living we're not siloed in the sense of this is the only moment in time that's ever existed. We've gone through a lot as a country, as a population. We have a deep sense of integrity and moral value, and I think the time is approaching soon where we'll be kind of dipping back down into those values. And I think, yeah, but at the end of the day, control what you can control. Um, and life is still meant for enjoying. So, that's my rant. But I think Johnny's returning here now. Next episode, I think we're probably we only were able to cover really kind of half of the content here, but really kind of finishing up the rest of chapter 7, and starting with chapter 8. So that should be next episode. And yeah, kind of the rare wholesome moment from me, I guess, for my rant. My rant was more of a gentle speaking too.
Hey, well, that's okay. I think we all go on different kinds of rants. I think I heard you trying to close the episode off, which we are nearing an hour and a half, I believe. So that would be a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
We haven't really even given anything that could be taken as financial advice, though. Like,
Yeah, except for buying industrials, but
well, I just want to give my piece of financial advice that isn't actually advice because I'm not a professional advisor, but it's what I'm doing. Based on the times that I think we're about to go into, a little World War III situation, and I don't know if we're gonna have time to dive into, why our world looks a lot like the times before World War I. But I believe it does, and you can find out why in the outline. But to prepare for that, I think we should be buying food and gold and silver and water filters because, one, I don't know. I think there's a bit of conspiracy in this book against gold, personally. On page 235, we see a little graph of gold returns versus a 60% equity, 40% bond return rate. But the weird thing is gold is shown. This is designed to say, okay, the returns of gold are this much in recessions, because the equity and bond portfolio, it only shows the times where it was below the baseline 0. And gold, well, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm getting distracted. I need to refocus. Let me just take a sip. And this would be my last point before we sign off. So, I believe gold is an OP investment because, for many reasons, which I will not get into, but one of them is because Ray Dalio seems to think that gold is not a good investment. But he doesn't really come out and say that. He's very suspect about what he thinks about gold. And if you look on page 235, we see the portfolio. It only shows the negative aspects of the stock and bond portfolio. It never goes above 0. Whenever it goes above 0, it just shows as 0 on this graph. Whereas gold, it shows the points where it goes above 0 and below 0. And I think that's because there is a conspiracy afoot. And I personally think that if we're heading into a war, it's a good idea to invest in hard assets that have maintained value throughout changing world orders, such as assets like gold. And so those are my closing thoughts.
I think that's it. I think next time we'll wrap up chapter 7 and go into chapter 8, right?
I think so. Well, I hope everyone has a nice rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you're listening to this. And we will meet you back next week in part 2 of the book, How the World Has Worked Over the Last 500 Years, in chapter 8, The Last 500 Years in a Tiny Nutshell. With
All
that,
right. 2 guys, 1 book. Signing off.